Thank you so much for coming. And today I'll talk about this topic of the age of mindfulness. We've all heard about different ages that humanity has gone through. So the hunter-gatherer age, then the age of agriculture, of farming, then the age of industrialization age, then the age of information, intelligence, semiconductor technology, the internet age, the age of e-commerce, as well as the age that we are in where everything is going on simultaneously. So this very complex age that we are living in. So where do we go next, and what is the next on the horizon in terms of what will come in front of us, both with opportunities and challenges? So every time an age changes, there is a lot of opportunity as well as a lot of agony for humanity. Right? So when the industrial age came, of course, there was a lot of opportunity of producing new kind of things, but there was a lot of crisis also on how humans were treated, as well as the role of humans in the industrial age. So I'll talk about now what I feel is an important age that is going to come, and what role, how we have to prepare ourselves in terms of education, in terms of research, in terms of technology, to both exploit and benefit from the age of mindfulness. So first, of course, one has to ask, is there even such a thing needed as the age of mindfulness? It's obviously not obvious. But if you look at modern technologies, and of course this department is one of the creators of such technologies, as well as many other universities, the College of Engineering, as well as the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. So modern technologies have literally transformed societies and brought us an enormous array of experiences which till even a few decades ago were almost fantasies. Right? So we have things now, we have gadgets, we have experiences which just a few years ago seemed like almost impossible. Technology has also removed scarcity in many spheres. That's one of the important roles of technology, to remove scarcity. Scarcity in food, scarcity in gadgets, we have good shelters, scarcity of knowledge, scarcity of credit, right? Even the banking industry. Web surfing, 200 channels of television, and unlimited reality shows, right? So we have just everything we want. Right? It seemed like it. We have everything we want. So why are we still not really happy? So technology has not removed or even decreased, and perhaps one may argue it has increased, our mental anxiety, the mind stress. Right? So certainly we don't have that much worry, day-to-day worry about where are we going to eat? Is there going to be food on the table? But still we are mentally very anxious. People are anxious. And everybody feels that. So whether you're rich or poor, mental anxiety is there, mental stress is there. And we don't have the tools, and certainly the technology has not developed to provide tools to affect our mind states. Right? So that makes it a very interesting age to live in, where certain scarcities have essentially disappeared from a lot of the part of the world. Right? There are still people who are hungry, there are still people who are suffering, but more and more people, and I'll show you some tables which kind of show how scarcity is being gradually removed through technology. Right? That doesn't mean that it's a good thing, but it is being removed. Right? So if you look at good life, and I've talked about this in the past lectures also, about the 7 layers of good life, starting from the body all the way to the mind. So the first layer of good life is, of course, physical wellness, being physically well, not being in pain, not suffering from food deprivation, not having suffering from sense of safety. So just pure physical wellness. That's very important. That's the very first level of good life, being physically well. Our children should not be starving, they should not be sick, they should not be deprived. So that's the first level. The second level is being able to be creative, being able to find new options in life, do things that we haven't done before, learn new things. So education, creativity, that's a very important part of life. Second aspect. And the third aspect, one would say, is a multidimensional role in life. Not having a single one-dimensional role, being able to run businesses, being a parent, being friends, having all those aspects in life. Then also, very important, having love in our life, which means having positive connections to others. Then being able to express ourselves, having a harmony between what we think, what we say, and what we do. So having that harmony in life, and then being self-reflective, being able to know ourselves. That's also very important. So we are able to follow our own path and not always follow the herd. Right? So that's a very important part of good life. And finally, having spirituality, having a connection to the universe. So all these things, starting from the very basic body needs to the brain needs to the mind needs, all of these are part of good life. So one has to recognize that we all need this, and these are all part of being a whole human being. Now, some of the challenges for wellness come from all these elements, and especially if we look at challenges from there are, of course, diseases, there are environmental pollution, so there are still people who are starving, still people who are suffering. Malaria is still there, cholera is still there, so there are diseases that are there, and many parts of the world are still suffering from that. But there's also challenges from the biology of the brain, and I'll talk about this somewhat in more detail, that the brain is something that one can look at it as from a biological point of view, something that follows pleasure, right? So we have input, output, and we pleasure. And there's very little self-monitoring circuitry in our brain. So if you look at the brain, and I'll spend some time looking at what is just in a superficial way, the brain biology, there's very little self-limiting circuitry in the brain. So if we have a lot of food, we just eat it. Right? So if we have a lot of, if scarcity is removed, we continue consuming because our brain is wired in a certain way where scarcity was pervasive. And so we don't have control over how we eat. We fall into addictions of all kinds, not just food, all kinds. Right? We fill our houses with all kind of stuff, even if you don't need it. So I'll talk about the brain as one of the challenges, just the biology of the brain as one of the challenges to our wellness. Then the challenges also come from being a conscious human being. Right? The fact that we are spiritual. If somebody suffers in another part of the world, we feel it. Right? And that is becoming more and more important because of the way we are connected to the whole world. 100 years ago, the main news we got was from our families and somebody living within our village. And now we are connected to the whole world. So we are constantly hearing about injustices. We are constantly hearing about environmental challenges. We're constantly hearing about all kinds of disasters happening in the world. And being conscious beings, we are not simply an animal. We are not a squirrel or a dog. We are conscious beings, and we are spiritual. So we feel a connection to others, and so we feel concerned about people we've never met. Their suffering affects us. We feel connected to environments where we've never been to. Right? So if there's an environmental disaster somewhere on the other side of the world, we feel it. Our mind goes in the state of anxiety. It also is optimistic. So it jumps into different states. And so our mind brings a lot of challenges to us because we are conscious spiritual beings. So things like feeling anxious, depressed become more and more important as the challenges of the body are reduced, and technology has played a great role in reducing those challenges. So the challenges then start shifting to the higher levels, to our mind. So when we look at the age of technology today, a big part of the age of technology is our lives are very sedentary. For a lot of us, our lives are very sedentary. So we are sitting for 8-10 hours when this body is designed to actually stand and work and run around or walk for 10, 12 hours. Instead, we are sitting for 10 hours, right? So a very sedentary lifestyle, which offers a lot of challenges to our physical wellness, but also to our mind wellness. And there are a lot of studies which even show that if you actually sit for 8, 9 hours a day, your lifespan is shortened, your health is, and of course our back suffer, our neck suffer, all kinds of things happen. So that's a downside of the age of technology. Then the 24-hour news cycle, we are connected to everybody all the time. The 24-hour news cycle brings a lot of awareness to us, and we are affected by it. Right? So environmental disasters affect us. Right? We constantly think about it. Even though we may not be able to do anything or it doesn't affect us, we still worry about it. Right? So there's a lot of anxiety from things that have no direct concern to us, but being spiritual, conscious beings, we are affected by it. We are affected by floods happening across the world. We are affected by children suffering anywhere in the world. So in the past, these images were not in front of us all the time. But now they are right in front of us. They are on our laptop, and we are sitting with them, watching them, and we are hearing about them all the time. And so not being able to then control your mind state affects us negatively in the sense that these are important issues. But if you have no tools to deal with these images flashing in front of you, then it's a serious challenge for your wellness. So I'll switch a little bit and talk about technology and good life. And this is the United Nations Development Index, HDI, as a function of energy consumption, which essentially represents the use of technology. Right? So mostly this energy consumption comes from the way we use technology. And anywhere from 0.9 to 1 is considered very high quality of life by the United Nations. There are 3 elements that go into this index. And there's a fairly straightforward formula that is used from gathering data. But basically, this depends on physical wellness represented by lifespan, then brain wellness represented through education, the years of education, and then your activity, social activity, and your income level, basically. So one can clearly see that as energy consumption increases, the index starting from way down here, which is countries like Afghanistan, some sub-Saharan countries, it improves and it comes to the developed countries. But one can also notice something interesting over here, which is actually quite heartening. That beyond, so this energy consumption is represented in kilograms of oil equivalent per person. So this is per capita consumption of oil equivalent, gallons of oil, kilograms of oil equivalent, right? Or how many kilograms you're consuming in equivalent. Of course, we don't consume only gasoline, so it's a representative. So around this 2,000 kilograms of oil equivalent, which translates to about 75 gigajoules of energy consumption per year. This is per year per person. The quality of life does not really improve. Right? So out here, it kind of saturates, and then it just stays there. In fact, even drops in some cases. And that's very heartening in some ways. That United States is around here, which is around 3 times where this saturation occurs. And then there are some countries even higher than that. And some countries actually have poor quality of life, even though they're consuming a lot of energy. And one of the outcomes, if one analyzes this curve, is that if the entire world consumed at the saturation point, so at this point, the energy consumption, which means these people and these people all came to this point, right? All 7 billion of us consumed at the saturation point, the energy consumption would be just where it is now. It would not require any more energy consumption, which means we are already consuming. It's just that it's distributed in a very different way. So there are people who are consuming almost nothing. There are people who are consuming way above what may be needed for high quality of life. Now, one can argue, and I personally don't like this Human Development Index because it's very limited. Earlier, I had shown you 7 layers of good life, and this Human Development Index ignores the higher level points. Right? So there's no concern about social connection. There's no concern about how many friends you have, how much love you have in your life, how much meditation you do, how aware you are, or how spiritual you are. Right? So it's the lower layers that are counted here. But still, it's an indication. One can also look at another index related to wellness, which is the happiness index, which is another complex index developed by Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania, where they've looked at the happiness index as a function. So this, again, they've characterized it in some units from 0 to 10, considering many other factors, not just the Human Development Index of United Nations. And in general, you do see a trend. And this, on this x-axis, the number doubles. So this is not a linear. So this from 2,000 to 4,000, then to 8,000, 16,000, 32,000. So out here are some of the richest countries. And out here are, of course, poorer countries. Now, one does see a trend that as overall, as you go up in wealth, your happiness index does improve. But here also, it's interesting to see, if you stay at this line, countries like Venezuela, some of Costa Rica, some of these countries, they have very low income level. But their happiness index is essentially the same as the highly developed countries. So in particular, some of the countries, like Venezuela, for example, has the same level on the scale as countries like US, Germany, Japan, which are actually much higher on the wealth scale. So what this suggests is there is something else and of course we know that, intrinsically we know that it's not simply how much technology you have, how much energy you consume, how much wealth you have, something else comes in as well. And that something else is your state of mind and how you use your state of mind. So I'll show you a universal input-output curve. And if you design a laser, you will see this curve. If you design an amplifier, you'll see this curve. If you design any kind of a system, a closed system, finite closed system. So if, for example, you're looking at a laser, and the input would be the input current, and the output will be the laser output in the laser frequency. As you increase the input, initially the laser won't laze, then it lazes, then it saturates, then it starts degrading because it gets hot. Right? The laser starts getting hot. Then the mirror starts disintegrating, and eventually the laser breaks down. Right? The same thing holds for any electronic system, optoelectronic system. But this curve is universal. This curve is universal. For example, if I look at my consumption of food, and I'm counting calories, so if my calorie input, and here this fruit would be my physical wellness, how healthy I am. Right? If I'm consuming less than few hundred calories, so 500 calories, I'm really a skeleton, I can't barely move, and I'm in really bad shape. Once I come to maybe a couple of thousand calories, I'm really healthy. If beyond 2,000 calories, I increase my food intake to 3,000 calories, it doesn't really help my wellness. And if I continue increasing, I'll start getting heavy, I'll start becoming obese, and eventually I won't be able to move. So this is a universal curve for any kind of consumption. Right? Whether it's an electronic device, and which is like this laser that I'm using, the current going into the laser, or the food I'm eating, the energy I'm consuming, the wealth I'm consuming, anything, this is kind of a universal curve. And interestingly, how important, so I have these 5 regions over here. The first region is where the losses are so high. It's a lossy region, so you're consuming something, but the losses are so high, there's really no benefit. Right? So you first have to overcome the losses. The second region is where you start benefiting, and so in laser physics it's called the coherent region. Then everything saturates, the third region. Then the residue accumulates, and the residue may be, in the case of a laser, the heating of the laser. In the case of food, the excess weight I'm gaining from eating food or consuming, and then eventually break down because the system just can't take it anymore, and it literally breaks down. Right? So if I put too much current into this laser, eventually the laser just disintegrates, and that's an irreversible breakdown. So this 5 regions, and then the thresholds or near thresholds that occur here, 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 and here, they are very important in our wellness, right? Because this applies to us as human beings also. So ideally, one would like to stay around here. Right? So if ideally one just dispassionately looked at a system, one would say one should stop here. But the brain circuit is wired in such a way that it can't stop here. And that's one of the dilemmas and challenges for us, that our brain is wired in such a way that we go all the way. It's very hard to stop here, and the only way to stop here is through mindfulness. Right? And that's why the age of mindfulness is becoming more and more important. Just an observation, in 2008, this is from the World Health Organization, the number of people suffering from diseases related to overconsumption of food exceeded the number of people suffering from underconsumption of food. And this is worldwide. Right? That the people who were suffering from diseases like diabetes, other obesity-related diseases like heart disease, blood pressure, etc., they were more worldwide, not just in this country, not just in developed country, but worldwide, than the people who are suffering from other diseases which are not related to overconsumption, like malnutrition, or not having access to medicine. So it's very important that 2008, 4 years ago, this happened, and of course, now the trend is going the other way. So if I were to design a well-designed technology, I would be very aware of this. So if I were to design a laser system or an electronic system or some of the other systems we design in this department, a technologist would be very careful to make sure that you operated here at this red arrow, and as soon as you went beyond that, there would be all kind of warning signals and all kind of prevention measures taken, so you don't go into this 4th region, and you certainly don't go into the 5th region. Right? That's a part of well-designed technology. So well-designed technology will provide not only what to lower the losses here, the gain to climb up this width, but very importantly to avoid going into these other regions. Right? Otherwise, this technology is not considered a good technology. Right? So that's part and parcel of technology, that you don't end up in this breakdown region where everything falls apart. So in this department, for example, we have all kind of electronic devices or optoelectronic devices, which like voltage converters, Zener diodes, feedback systems, cooling systems, all kind of things to make sure that we don't end up here, because then the structure is destroyed. And normally one would think the brain should also have a similar ability to protect ourselves. Right? But unfortunately, the brain does not have that ability. That ability has to be developed. Right? So nature and evolution hasn't given us that ability. So very quickly, I'll go through some of the issues of removal of scarcity, because some of the challenges that are coming where mind is becoming so important is because some of the scarcities that were present a few hundred years ago, even 50 years ago, and certainly 2,000 years ago, when our brain was developing, there was a lot of scarcity. Those scarcities have been removed, and as a result, the brain that was developed at that time, being used now, needs some additional tools. So if you look at food, from the hunter-gatherer era to agriculture, and now big agro-business, right? When we talk about food now, of course, it's big agro-business. If you go to a typical large grocery store, you may have 20,000 products, and you look at the ingredients, and you can't recognize most of the ingredients because they have almost nothing related to what a farmer, in our mind at least, is doing. So from simple farming, it's becoming huge, big agro-business where basically it's just you don't almost want to think about how food comes to our table. Right? It can become so complex. And in fact, the food scarcity has been removed. If you go to a typical grocery store, as I mentioned, there's just like thousands of products, just abundance of food, calories costing almost nothing. Right? You can pick up a can of soda that is sitting there also. Right? In 5 seconds, you can drink 200 calories, and the cost is almost nothing. And this is not true just only in the developed countries. And here is a food chart which says the global and regional per capita food consumption, kilocalories per capita per day, worldwide. And so this is worldwide. And you can see that now we are around 2015. The worldwide per capita consumption is close to 3,000 calories per person worldwide. That doesn't mean that the distribution, there are people who are still suffering from malnutrition, but on an average, worldwide, the consumption is close to 3,000 calories, which is way above what a healthy person should eat. most healthy people, especially the way we work now, should not be eating more than, say, 2,500 calories. So worldwide, already this is much higher. So other than sub-Saharan Africa, where it's still around 2,300, almost everywhere, and certainly in developed countries, where it's reaching 3,500 calories, like in the US, and the result is, of course, the brain is not able to stop. So just because food is there, we do eat it on an average. And as a result, we suffer from diseases that are related to overconsumption. So removal of the scarcity of food is, of course, very, very important, but our brain is not used to that era. So something is needed. Then going to gadgets, technology. So just like the scarcity of food has been removed, we have incredible amount of gadgets. We have in typical factories now, of course, this is a car factory, but almost all production is so highly automated, and it will become more and more automated. So these robots, as they become more and more integrated into technology, almost anything that involves a repetition can be done by a robot. So personal robots, home robots, they're all coming, and they're all almost here. And then what will the role of the human being be? Because they'll produce, already today, the capacity of car production, worldwide capacity of car production, is such that only 65% of the cars are actually needed from what is produced. So even today, of course in cars, but cars are big objects, of course, so production has become so inexpensive that you go to anybody's home, and especially people who have a lot of wealth, if you go to their home, the homes are just packed with stuff, almost stuff that is never needed for a good life. But that's how our brain is. It was evolved, it grew up during times of scarcity. Then we look at devices that we make here in this department, the intelligent technology. And these are some historic pictures. So from transistors to lasers to solar cells to optical devices, then thin film technology, touch technology, and essentially these are the technologies that drive all our technology, from smartphones to this little thing I'm holding in the laptop. So these 6, 7 technologies, coupled with software, coupled with internet backbones and so on, had brought in that age of knowledge. So age of food being removed, then gadgets, and then knowledge. So as a result, we have abundance of information age technology, knowledge, information. We have entertainment, we have, of course, military equipment, telecommunication, all kind of things. So we are fully connected. We are enormously connected, but we are connected to the good, bad, and the ugly. So we are connected to everything, right? And everything is coming into us. The other thing that is also very important is that the new technology of knowledge age, this is the MATLAB, just a kind of a logo, allows us to solve complex problems. So earlier, complex differential equations were solved only by a handful of people. You had to go to study a lot of mathematics, maybe go to college, take all these courses, and then you would probably be able to solve some difficult differential equations. And now a high school student trained in MATLAB can solve very, very complicated problems. Right? That's something also that technology has brought us ability of the mind, of the brain power, that was first restricted to very few, and now it's pervasive. So you can't say, I'm very special because I can solve differential equations. Right? So as scarcity gets lost, the privilege that comes from knowing something also gets lost. Right? So that's also important to mind, to us, because the way we educate students has changed as a result. And I'll come back to this because there's a lot of hope in such simulation technologies to teach us mindfulness. Just like they can teach us solving differential equations, these technologies can also teach us other things. So this again, very complex accounting laws and accounting and medicine, all kind of law is now available on simple laptop computational tools. So you don't have to be specialized to do very complex things. So if you look at scarcity, the scarcity is shifting from the body, the brawn to the brain to the mind. So the scarcity, so there are pennies here and there's gold here. Going down the list of where things are scarce, food is certainly not scarce, right, for most of the world. And I showed you even worldwide food is not scarce. Of course, we do see images, and there are definitely places where people are suffering because of lack of food. But overall, food is not scarce. Gadgets are not scarce. Credit and loans are not scarce. And of course, we suffer because of all of that as well. Information is not scarce. You can give a child in 8th grade a smartphone and ask him any question, and they'll give you answers. Right? Or you can go in and look at Wikipedia, you can look at Google. So information is not scarce anymore. We know all kinds of things. Right? Knowledge is not scarce either. Where the scarcity now lies is converting knowledge to action. Right? So knowing is no big deal. Right? So if you're a pundit, you know something, that means nothing. Right? So the scarcity has shifted to the gap between knowledge and action, being able to convert your knowledge into doing something. How do you release mental stress? That's enormously scarce. How do you accept and change your mind states? That is enormously scarce. It's very, very difficult. In fact, more and more of the challenges of wellness have shifted from physical wellness to mind wellness. So coming back to this curve, this universal kind of consumption fruit curve. So when we look at pleasure consumption of food, especially sugar and fat, of even exercise, right? So if you look at this consumption as exercise, even exercise beyond a certain point hurts you. Right? So this is a universal curve for all these things. Free money, television. Television and web are very useful, but they can also, if you sit in front of the TV or you sit in front of the internet for 8-10 hours a day, you will reach this stage 5. Right? So all of these things have a limit, and as a result, it becomes increasingly important. Right? If these things were not abundant, then of course we wouldn't have to worry about this region, 4 and 5. But since they are abundant, one has to ask, how do we avoid the regions 4 and 5? And how do we diversify our pleasures so we don't end up here? Right? And that all of that relates to mindfulness. Now, what is the role of technology in this curve? So technology has been very influential in these two regions. Right? So removing scarcity, providing us the ability to consume. So removing losses and providing us new kind of experiences. Right? Technology has been very, very important. So 5 stars for technology to bring us at this point. But technology has not done very much in this region. Right? So, and technology is very good also in this region 5, how to repair the damage. Right? So almost all our healthcare technology is geared to this region 5, where we break down, we suffer, and then the physicians come and they help us. And of course, it's a very expensive technology. But technologists like to work here, and they like to work here. We usually don't like to work here. Right? So if one looks at technologies, as I mentioned, we like working in the region 1, 2, and then 5. The funding models that support technology, the funding models that come from industry, from the government, they also like to support 1, 2, and 5. And markets certainly like 5, because 5 is where the money has to be made. Right? Where you break down, then somebody comes and fixes you, and then, of course, a lot of wealth can be exchanged. Right? So the region 5 is very useful for the markets. Because if you are hurt, if you come to the point where you are sick, you need a physician. If you're not sick, why would you need a physician? Right? If you're driving a car and you drive your car very mindfully, it doesn't get into a car crash, why would you need an auto repair shop? Right? So the region 5 is very beneficial from a market point of view. And in fact, a lot of our consumption and expenses relate to region 5. So we are normally geared towards this curve, and I'm going to show you now some things about the brain. So most of the things we decide are, of course, with our brain. And of course, advances in brain studies have shown a lot of information and detailed information about the way the brain works. So the mapping of the brain, the biology of the brain is very, very advanced now. So certainly over the last 20 years, we have learned so much about how our senses impact, how the outer senses go into our brain, how the brain is affected by them. Then understanding of the circuit of desire, effort, pleasure is very well understood. Right? How pleasure is created in the brain through neurotransmitters, how we seek pleasure, how we then change our modify our behavior as a result of pleasure. And understanding our addictive behavior is very well understood. Right? So there's been tremendous advances in our understanding of the brain, how the brain functions, how it drives us to do some things, and based on simple chemicals. Right? So this is not very esoteric, because the biologists and the neuroscientists, they are looking inside the brain and finding out all these things happening in the brain. So a lot of the mapping of the brain has been done, and very importantly, how we seek pleasure and how we modify our behavior with pleasure is very well understood. So when we look at the brain studies, they have been clearly, so this, for example, is a very simple brain image of somebody moving their hand and how the brain intensity changes. Right? So moving a hand, if you move your fingers, how the brain changes. And all of this can be mapped in real time by neuroscientists. How food affects the brain signals, how the pleasure centers of the brain are affected by food, how the pleasure centers are affected by exercise, smoking, meditation. All of these have been mapped. And so we have a lot of understanding of how the brain functions as an intermediary and controller from the outside to the inside world. Addiction has been very well understood. Now, a really difficult challenge is to go from the brain biology to the mind, because that's a very complex situation. And in science, it's equivalent to saying, how do you go from Newton's equation to thermodynamics? Right? So Newton's equation, very useful for simple systems, and thermodynamics needed for very complex systems. Right? So certainly there is no thermodynamics yet for the brain, for the mind state. There is a lot of understanding of the biology of the brain, but there is almost no understanding of the mind state. So going from the brain's states, the neurotransmitters firing, to the mind. So there's a huge opportunity for scientists, just like when thermodynamics was understood, a whole range of new technologies came out, but thermodynamics is actually way more complex than Newton's equations. Right? And one needs a similar kind of breakthrough of constructing a complex system out of simple systems. Right? And that's what the mind state is. The brain, in all its complexity, is still a simple system compared to a mind state. So if you look at the pleasure circuits of the brain, and I'll talk more and more about the mind now, because a lot of this is now related to the mind. So what scientists are finding is that there are many sources of pleasure, not just food. Smoking is an intense source of pleasure, and of course, if you start smoking, you become addicted very quickly. You go to that region 5 very quickly. But all these things can bring you to the region 5. They provide pleasure, but they take you to the region 5. So desire, action, pleasure circuit driven by the pleasure neurotransmitters. So very chemical. So this is nothing to do with morality or ethics or your willpower. It's purely a chemical process, which is not that different from driving a laser into breakdown, into damage. So technology developed. So essentially, our brain, this brain here, was developed 20, 30, 50,000 years ago at a time, or even longer before that, at a time where there was no abundance of anything. Right? So our brain circuitry was developed at a time where we had no food, almost no food. We had almost no other gadgets to play with. Right? Certainly there was no TV, there were no reality shows. We were deprived in almost every sphere of experience. Right? There were beasts, hungry beasts, wanting to eat us. That's where the brain was developed. But now the same brain finds itself in a period of abundance and overabundance. Right? So that is a challenge. It's very much like having a technology that was developed for a 5-volt power supply suddenly being plugged in to a 220-volt power supply. Right? So our brain is just not capable of dealing with a lot of these challenges that are now coming to us from abundance, unless, and of course a 5-volt supply design technology can work with 220 volts, provided there is a proper protection technology. Right? There are proper down converters, voltage converters, then you can use it. And the same kind of things are needed for our mind. So the brain research directions are going in different directions. And one of the important areas which is being pursued in many departments is using the understanding of how the brain functions in recognizing voice, image, smell, etc., to design better computers. Right? So that's one area where how the brain works is being used, those studies are being used to design better computers. Right? That's one area. And that's an important area of, but that's not what I'm going to talk about, because that has nothing to do with mindfulness. It's an important area. Then the brain imaging is also being used by pharmaceutical and medical systems to understand how drugs work, how therapies for drugs work, how intervention therapies work, and that's also an important area. But the understanding of the relation between brain states and mind states is almost nothing known, and how important, what happens when neurons fire to I'm feeling joyful, right? Or I'm feeling optimistic, or I'm feeling very sad. What happens in between? Right? What's that connection? So there's a lot of room for understanding there. So if you look at a prehistoric brain, because our brain is prehistoric compared to where we are now, there are critical parts of our brain that are very primitive. We want to hoard, consume, even if there's no scarcity. Right? So this is one of the things built into the brain, because it was developed during a time of scarcity. So we still, because the brain has not evolved. Right? So the technology has evolved completely, transformatively in the last 50 years, but the brain has not evolved. And we know that. So the brain still wants to hoard and consume, and there's no safety circuits in the brain. There are almost no safety circuits. Then other things which the brain does also from its primitive nature is familiarity. Familiarity equals safety. If we see somebody who we are familiar with, we feel safe, even if the person may be very dangerous. And strangers are equated to suspicion, fear. So we still have racist feelings, we still feel superiority because of our race, of color, all these things are still there, because they're part and parcel of how our brain developed. Also beyond a certain threshold, the instincts take over, and all logic, everything we learn and we believe in is thrown out beyond a certain level of threshold of stress. And very importantly, release of stress is very, very difficult for the brain, because the brain was not developed for the kind of stresses we are. So if our brain is stressed, it's very difficult for the brain to come back to its ground state, to its relaxed, calm state. So if somebody shouts at me, I'm in the street and somebody shouts at me, it takes me a long time to recover from that, even though that shouting had no real danger to me. Right? So I still can't recover from it. So there are many things, and that's where mindfulness, techniques of mindfulness become important. So there are several tasks that are needed to bring the brain to the modern age. So what are some of the mindfulness tasks? The very first one is observe ourselves. Right? So if we look at this chart again, to stop at this point, we need to be observing ourselves. Right? And that's a concept that is a little bit important, but also seems difficult. How do we observe ourselves? Because we are only observing the outside world. Right? So all our senses are geared towards the outside world, because that's the world that affects us. Right? So my eyes are open, I can observe you. I can observe a car coming at me, I can observe a bicyclist running into me. I can observe all that, but how do I observe myself? And observation of yourself is very important to stay here, because if you can't observe yourself, you will gradually go here. Right? And that does happen. Right? So the brain is wired to that, because the brain essentially takes you out here unless somebody intervenes. Right? Because the biology of the brain developed during scarcity never really had the consumption available to go out here. Right? So the first task for technology is to recognize that self-observation is very critical. And then how do we observe ourselves, and how can technology help observe ourselves. So technologies that help us observe ourselves are needed to counter the technologies we are living in. Then the second task, task B, I mentioned to you that our brain bypasses. So every year in New Year's we make resolutions. We'll do this, we'll exercise, we'll get up in the morning, we'll do this, and by February all these resolutions are thrown out. So our brain releases all the logic, the part that thinks logically, understands, rationalizes, all of that is thrown out beyond a certain threshold level. So if you look at the threshold, if you look at stress, up to a certain level of stress, we behave very rationally. We can behave in a way that we have decided we'll behave. Beyond a certain stress level, our brain bypasses everything, and this little thing called amygdala here is the reason it short circuits all our brain connections, and it acts instinctively. And a lot of times our instincts may be right, but most of the time the instincts developed at a part of history in human history where things are beyond a certain stress level, people say things that they never thought they could ever say. Right? And often people say things that are so derogatory and so irreverent, and they look back and say, how could I possibly say that? How could I possibly behave in such a way? That was somebody totally different. Right? So we have this in our brain, the circuitry is wired in such a way that we bypass all our knowledge, intelligence, and go into a very primitive state beyond a certain. So the second task is how can we increase this threshold of stress level so that we can push this point from here out here, so we stay in a way that we want to stay. Right? So that is what one can say, closing the gap between knowledge and action. Right? So you may have knowledge, but you may have an action which is completely different from your knowledge. Right? So we may say something, we may believe in something, but act in a completely different way. So how can technology help in extending that threshold? And the two more tasks that technology has for this developing this mindfulness, when a stress comes to us, so here is a stress, our mind gets stressed, and that's very appropriate. It takes us a long time to release the stress. Sometimes stress can be released in minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes days, sometimes years. And there are some communities which can't release stress even in centuries. So people are fighting because 100 or 200 years ago, your grandparents did something to my grandparents or great-grandparents. People are fighting about that. So the ability to release stress quickly is very, very important in today's age, especially, right? With all the challenges that are coming our way. So we get stressed, and there are so many sources of stresses, but letting go of the stress becomes extremely difficult. And as a result, of course, there are simple things that we can't sleep. If something happens to us during the day, we are at work, something happens to us, we can't sleep. Even though that stress has gone, it has left us, it has really no impact on us, but we can't let go. So our mind is locked into that state, and we all suffer from that, right? Every one of us suffers from that. So it's not something that happens once in a while. All of us suffer from that. That a stress is created and it lingers. It lingers. So this residual time is a very important time in our wellness. And how does one recover from stress? Can technology help us recover from stress? And then how do we change our mindset? So sometimes our mind goes into a dark state. We feel sad and we can't identify why are we feeling sad. Can technology help us pull us out of that state into a more brighter state? So how do we avoid these issues of sleep, anxiety, despair, mental stress, and so on? So when we look at challenges now in today's age, most of the challenges are coming from our mind state, right? Because a lot of physical challenges, physical things have been resolved. Stress lingers long after its positive benefit. So stress certainly has a positive benefit, because you can respond to something that is dangerous, maybe dangerous. But once the stress has gone, we ourselves sometimes realize, why am I worrying about this? It has no effect on me. Why am I anxious about something where I can't do anything? But yet it lingers. So mind remains in a ruminating state. It just lingers, thinks about it constantly. The mind wanders into dark thoughts. And this is a very common phenomenon. In fact, mind-related illnesses have now become the dominant sources of illnesses, especially in developed countries. Right? So in countries where, like our country, as well as all developed countries, the mind-related illnesses relating directly to mind stress have become more dominant than. We don't get contagious diseases very much anymore. Right? We don't actually get malaria and cholera. Those things have been pretty much taken care of. Most of the things we suffer from, in fact, the biggest prescription drug in this country is for depression, right, which is a mind-related illness. Now, of course, some of the mind-related challenges are chemical in nature. Right? So the brain chemistry has disintegrated or has suffered, and it needs a physician, needs a professional. But 80% of those mind-related stresses are, in fact, simply inability to know how to change your mind state. So there are technologies and techniques one can learn and use. Just like I can learn mathematics, I can learn languages, I can learn how to drive a car, I can learn how to ride a motorcycle, drive a plane. I can learn how to control my mind state. Right? And there are techniques. Unfortunately, these techniques are mostly in the sphere of meditation, yoga, psychotherapy, and so on. But they need to be brought in because they are so important. Their need is so acute. Now, we know that technology affects our behavior. Technology affects our mind states. So technology is known to create products that change our behavior. Right? So almost all technology, you get a smartphone, your behavior changes. You get an internet connection, your behavior changes. Right? So technology is very powerful in changing our physical behavior, also our mind behavior. Usually, technology has not been thought of how does it bring us into a better mind state. But that's where a lot of the need is. So technology, we know technology affects us, and it can be used. Right now, technology is designed primarily as a force for market, driven by market. But its use in mindfulness is becoming very, very important. And that's where a lot of opportunity arises for engineers, for scientists to create technologies that will do that. So if we look at mindfulness, I gave you 4 tasks where mindfulness is very important. So avoiding regions 4 and 5, the regions where you consume something and the pleasure stops and it degrades you. So that region of breakdown and so on. So the solution there is self-observation, learning to observe yourself so you can observe. And that's a very difficult challenge. Observing yourself is one of the hardest things. Right? It's very easy to observe somebody else. Right? Very easy to find a fault in somebody else. But self-observation is very, very difficult. Right? And even highly intelligent people can't observe themselves. And even highly intelligent people act in ways that one thinks, what did they learn? How are they so smart? So self-observation is very difficult. And that's an important part of the meditative techniques. And very interestingly, meditation and the effect of meditation on the brain is one of the most studied neuroscience areas. Right? So neuroscientists are very interested in how does a person who's an expert in meditation, how do they so quickly change their mind state? Within minutes, they can change their mind state. And the observers in neuroscience can see it, right, in the brain image, how the mind state completely changes. Right? So these techniques are there, but these techniques are very difficult to master. And they're usually mastered by monks or people who've been practicing meditation for years. They can certainly reach that mind state, and it's empirically clear. So it's not just I'm saying that or people are saying that. You can see it in the brain images, that they are able to change their mind state. But this is, again, requires time and dedication, just like mathematics. Right? So if you see a really brilliant mathematician, they can solve incredibly difficult equations, problems in differential equations, calculus, something that an average person thinks, how can they do it? It's the same kind of thing. But just like MATLAB has made differential equations available to us, an average person who is not an expert in mathematics, and simulation techniques have done that for an average person. So an average person can come in and start designing microprocessors, right? Or solving very complex problems. That's where technology has to come in and teach meditation tools to allow people to learn techniques that are normally very, very difficult. Just like mathematics is difficult, bring it to people. And I think that's where there's a lot of opportunity for technology to contribute. And how do we increase our threshold for stress, where we shift from one kind of behavior to another kind of behavior? And yoga provides a lot of guidance on this. So in yoga, there is a concept of postures, difficult postures. You take very difficult postures and try to keep your mind calm and gradually push the threshold of stress beyond which your mind changes from properly logical, rational to irrational. Right? So this, again, can be simulated by technologies. Technology can take us into stressful states. And one of the most important examples of this is the flight simulator, which I'll talk about. Right? So the flight simulator of a pilot, basically that's what it does. It does what a person practicing yoga does. That is, you take a very difficult posture, hold it for a long period of time, try to keep your mind calm throughout the posture, and gradually your mind just becomes in that state that doesn't bypass, and you don't become somebody different, and you're able to keep your resolution. So technology can do that, and simulation techniques and gaming techniques are going to be very, very useful in developing our mindfulness. Then how do you recover from stress? And there are breathing techniques that have been developed, and these are also, so fortunately a lot of this is now validated and can be validated by technology. Right? So in the past there was no technology to actually see inside the brain, but now we can do that. We can see, are these techniques that are coming from, say, years of observation or years of meditative practices or thousands of years of practices in other systems, are they really valid? And we can see them, are they valid? And if they are valid, we can incorporate them into technology. Right? So that's the age of mindfulness, where concepts of mindfulness get incorporated in technology through various kinds of new technologies. So technology basically incorporating the knowledge from brain science, from yoga, from behavior modification research, incorporating that into technologies, gadgets, simulation programs, games, which will allow us to overcome some of the challenges that our brain faces because it was developed during a time very different from where we live in. So can efficient techniques be developed and taught to us? And I personally believe very much so, and there's a huge opportunity there for technologists to contribute. And also it's a very holistic area of research because it involves people from so many diverse areas of research. So when we look at science and the brain and the mind, so simulation studies for the brain's behavior, developing predictive tools, and there's a lot of research now that is going on to predict, based on simple equations, mathematical equations, how our behavior, how we behave, how we seek pleasure, how we give up pleasure for higher good, all those things can be now simulated. Where do the thresholds for various type of consumptions occur? I mentioned these 5 areas. Why and where does consumption start becoming dangerous to us? Why do we break down? So there are opportunities. And then finally, of course, the biggest opportunity, how do we connect neuron activity to mind states of joy, optimism, depression? So what is the path from biology to the mind? Right? And that's where, what is the thermodynamics of the brain? Right? So we have, so far, the neuroscientists have primarily looked at the biology of the brain. It's like scientists looking at Newton's equations. But going to the mind state is like scientists going from Newton's equations to thermodynamics. And that has not happened yet. Right? That's not happened. So we have not developed an understanding of the mind. We have developed enormous understanding of the brain, which is very, very useful, because that's what will help us go to some of these other areas. So a lot of mathematical tools that are used to understand electronic systems can be used to understand this diagram for the body, for the brain. And the understanding the fruit consumption relation, this relation for different kind of activities. So there's a lot of research that is both going on, because neuroscientists are working on this. This is the addiction diagram. This is how we get addicted. And so it's a very important area of research to avoid, of course, the state of addiction. So this is one of the most important technologies because it shifts the stress threshold level. Right? So this is the flight simulator for the pilot. And what this simulator does is places enormously challenging, stressful situations for the pilot. Because the pilot has to live under conditions, and the pilot is holding in his hands or his brain the lives of 300-400 people. And the pilot goes into conditions which are not normal conditions, like extreme turbulence. The plane falls 50-60 feet, and the pilot cannot afford to change from a rational behavior to an instinctive behavior. And so the flight simulator pushes the stress threshold of the pilot so far out that he never encounters that stressful period where the amygdala of the brain takes over. Amygdala of the brain meaning he reacts instinctively. Right? So the pilot cannot react instinctively because the plane he's flying is not an instinctive thing. It's an aerospace engineered product, and the pilot cannot afford to pass that threshold where he says, let me just try this. So the pilot has to be trained. So the flight simulator is an excellent example of new kind of technologies. Now the flight simulator, of course, is designed for the pilot, but the gaming technology that is behind the flight simulator can create games that can train us to live in the modern world, which means living under conditions where, say, we are facing stress at work, we are facing financial stress, we're dealing with continued bad news, right? Anxieties of the consciousness. All of this can be simulated, and the brain can be trained, because the brain is a great organism, it's a great system, and it can learn. Right? So it hasn't evolved in a way that it's ready for where we live, but it can be trained. Right? And therefore, almost everything that I mentioned before can be developed in terms of just like the flight simulator. Because if one looks at the brain of a pilot and the behavior of the brain of the pilot, and there are studies now also of that, because you can image the stress relation in a pilot's brain to an average person. And you can see that how calm the pilot stays under conditions where a normal person just goes crazy. Right? The pilot is totally calm. And they have to be, and especially pilots who are constantly under stress, like fighter pilots. So that's a very good example of technology of shifting the mindfulness. But this technology needs to come so that it's just available to everybody. Right? Because we're all facing stresses. We are not flying planes, but we're all facing the same kind of similar stresses. So one can say 3 or 4 levels of technologies. The first level technology is very simple. Just a passive reminder, just like the expiration label on food. Right? If you have an expiration label on, and this is a milk carton, says sell or consume by March 22nd, that has an important effect on us. Just being reminded of something has an important effect. Right? So the first level technology is just like a reminder technology. So gadgets that we use every day, laptop, smartphone, just to remind us. Simple thing like don't be worried. Don't get anxious. Just to remind us. They have profound effect, just like this date over here has a profound effect on us. Right? So if we pick up a carton, we look at the date, and the date has expired, we don't consume it. Right? We respond to that label. In the same way, a laptop or a smartphone just simply saying every hour or hour and a half, get up and stretch, has a profound effect on us. And especially if certain breathing techniques are also learned. So this is the first level, just passive reminder, just every hour reminding us. And that technology is already there. Right? I personally use it. So you can program your laptop, you can program your smartphone to just every hour tell you, get up, do a little bit stretching, do a few breaths, and try it, and you'll be amazed how much benefit you'll have from this very passive. It's the same kind of benefit as this label. Right? It's very passive, it's just there for you, and you can use it. The second level technology, which is also there, is this is an intelligent camera with an intelligent microprocessor. It can observe you. So this is used in companies and factories. It observes a person and gives feedback to the person. Right? So it's a very simple, it's a technology that is already there. So this gives active reminders, not passive reminders, but active reminders, because it's observing you. It can observe you just like a person, and say, sit straight. It can tell you all kinds of things. It can, of course, you have to agree to it. You say, okay, I want an intelligent camera in my office, and it just observes me. If I'm sitting too hunched for too long, just remind me to sit straight. Just that little moment helps us a lot. Right? So this is involving, it just interrupts you, and this technology is already there. Right? Of course, we are not using it, but it's there. This technology is already there, and it's quite inexpensive. The first technology, first level, is free because we already have all that. Now, going to a higher level technology, observe us at a deeper level, that requires new kind of brain sensors that will actually observe our stress level through either our brain or through our breath. Right? So a lot of stress molecules we exhale when we breathe. And there's a lot of interesting research in that. So a person who's stressed, the saliva coming from their mouth has cortisone, levels of stress molecules that can tell what level of stress there is. And certainly observing directly the brain pattern can tell. So this is a higher level of technology, which brings technology from the medical school into everyday life, right? Which can observe you and say, you're feeling too much stress, you're feeling too much anxious, and observe your breath pattern, which also reflects stresses, and nudge us and give us guidance. And finally, the fourth level, and this is very much like the flight simulator, which basically observes our mood, so there's that technology, and observes and gives us guidance. And the last level of technology, which I hope someday comes, and I would be very happy to have it, where a robot teaches me how to meditate. Right? A robot implements tools of meditation. So very smart, and a robot can learn anything. Right? A robot is, it can be taught. So one of the difficulties with meditation techniques is that it's very difficult to learn those techniques. You have to be with a mentor who guides you, and maybe it takes months and months of practice before you can come to that state. It's like I mentioned, one of the other hard things the brain learns, mathematics. So mathematics is a very difficult thing to learn. It takes years of practice, but it has a lot of benefits. The meditation is also very similar. It takes years of practice. And so it's very difficult to propagate it universally. But just like simulation tools like MATLAB, CAD tools have made mathematics available to everyday person, or a lot of people, meditation tools implemented through technology, I think, will have a profound effect. And so this level 4, where intervene as a gentle, concerned person, provide guidance and mentorship, where robots go beyond. So right now we think of robots, well, they'll clean a house, they'll cook for us, they'll do this, that, move our furniture around. That's, of course, trivial stuff. Right? Where robots can actually observe us, be mentors, and guide us, and eventually we won't need that. Of course, the goal is not to need your mentor. Right? So if you go and train with a guru or a teacher, and the teacher teaches you something, eventually you don't want the teacher. Right? So, but to come to that point, and is very important, how do you come to that point? I think technology can play an enormous role over there to guide us and bring us to the point where we can start learning these techniques. So I'm going to teach you a technique now. So that's the end of the talk. And I'm going to teach you a technique to change your mind state. So please stand up, and I'm going to make you laugh. So, and some of you have already done this, so you know what's going to happen. So I'm going to practice a breathing exercise with you, which you'll be surprised how good you feel after that breathing exercise. And the first thing is we'll just practice 2 or 3 yogic breaths. So yogic breaths are breaths where you inhale through your mouth, pressing your abdomen out. Very slow inhale, then hold for a moment, savor the breath, then you exhale, hold for a moment, prepare for the next breath, right? So like a cycle. And then we'll do 3 breaths, and then after that I'll change your mind state even more. So let's bring our heels together and press your toes into the earth like you're grounded. Then bring your hands and touch your fingers and thumbs and open your chest. And stand tall and strong, and we'll bring arms to the side and up, inhaling, then come back exhaling. So just make sure you don't hit each other. So let's slowly inhale. opening your chest, opening your heart, reaching up. Then slowly exhale. Let's do 2 more with more, like a dance. And opening your throat and smiling this time. Do 2 more breaths, and in the next one, at the exhale, we'll laugh out as hard as you can. Right? So prepare your lungs, laugh out as hard as you can, and see what happens to your mind. So let's inhale. And we'll laugh harder, and again. Okay, and just release your stress and observe your mind. So there are very simple things that can change your mindset, mind state. That's what this talk was about, and I hope I convinced you a little bit of the importance of mindfulness. Thank you for coming.